Brittany Post stood tensely in the living room of a nice, rustic suburban home. And despite the apparent familiarity of her surroundings, she felt uneasy. She saw it from the corners of her eyes. It was currently standing on the opposite side of the windows, peering in at her. Occasionally moving nearer and occasionally maintaining its distance. Playing with me. The thought chilled her to the bone. She pondered Tommy. God. Tommy. Going trekking had been her idea. It sounded like a good way to spend some quality time with Tommy, get out of the house, clear her mind, and perhaps spark some musical creativity, all while staying in shape. While she was by no means out of shape, she could not help but feel that she could reduce a few pounds around her midsection. Tommy had never complained, but Tommy was not the kind to pass judgment. He was also 6 feet 4 inches and had the physique of a Greek god, making it difficult not to feel a little self-conscious. Sitting behind a keyboard most days and intermittently pursuing a music career was not exactly the most physically demanding job. It was a privilege granted to her by the fact that her parents had done well enough for themselves that, at age 21, she did not have to worry too much about finding a real job. Certainly, she had college classes. But none of that captivated her as music did. Or Tommy, if you like. Which naturally lead to hiking. Tommy had been delighted to accompany her, and of course he was familiar with the best trails. The treks were just what she had hoped for. They had begun with some easy ones near to home before becoming more daring, and the hikes were all she had hoped for. She felt better and was confident that the music she composed was also superior. She had at one point begun incorporating the sounds of rushing water and chirping birds into her music, resulting in these calming, serene piano compositions that had achieved some success. Her internet following nearly doubled in the 3 months since she began doing it. Then, a shift occurred. She had no idea why. She did not sure if she had made a mistake or if she had merely drawn the attention of anything by chance. However, she realized that something was following her. She began to see it at night. There was a mysterious figure in the street outside her bedroom window. He was never completely in the light, but she could make out his soiled, mud-stained pants and cat-like eyes. Every night, she was convinced that it was getting a little closer. Then there came the presence. She began discovering them on her front door and automobile hood. Arrangements of clean, white teeth and animal bones, as though to indicate that something had been there. After a few days, she began discovering them inside the house. She found a squirrel skull in her drawer, tiny animal bones in the drain of her bathroom sink, and what she believed to be human teeth beneath her bedsheets. She had phoned the police, as expected. But they were virtually useless. Even with a police car stationed in front of her residence, they had not noticed the bizarre man standing on her lawn. He appeared to be closer than before. Tattoos like runes covered his bare chest. His jeans were filthy and mud-covered. His hair was long and unruly, and his hands were. They appeared to have very little visible flesh. Even from her window, she could observe the skeletal structure. She had not seen his face at that time. However, she understood that she did not wish to. Tommy was informed of the situation shortly after she discovered the fractured teeth. She expected him to dismiss her as insane. Instead, while she spoke, he gradually lost color in his face. His eyes grew bigger and wider, revealing an alien look of panic on his face. Tommy, being the towering black Adonis that he was the type of man who others instinctively avoided insulting. With sculpted features and a powerful, booming voice, he was an intimidating-looking man. Brittany did not care if he was one of the kindest and softest-spoken individuals she had ever encountered, or that she had once witnessed him sobbing while holding a kitten because it was too precious. He appeared frightening and was not a man who was easily frightened. Seeing such utter panic on his face and hearing him ask, "Do you see him too?" only increased her terror. That evening, he revealed to her that he had been observing the same man outside his window. He described how he simply vanished whenever Tommy attempted to confront him. And he had informed her about the bones he had discovered. Teeth, ribs, skulls, as well as. It appeared to have been a raccoon, but it had been torn up so severely that he was unable to positively identify it. Together, they had searched for a solution, but none could be found. The tattooed man appeared to be following them at all times. Brittany would spot him standing in her home's hallway, and Tommy would later tell her that he was in his backyard that same night. Not until 2 nights ago had the situation reached its climax. She learned of the assault from one of Tommy's roommates. Supposedly, they were awakened by a crash and discovered Tommy covered in blood on the front lawn. He had fallen from his window and suffered severe injuries. His survival was nothing short of miraculous. He had given neither the police nor the doctors a clear statement, and Brittany had only seen him once since then. However, the terrified look in his eyes and the jagged claw marks on his arms and face told her everything she needed to know. The tattooed man had arrived. They both knew that he was lucky to be alive and that he would eventually come for her, but she had no way to stop him. Brittany had taken the only course of action a desperate woman could take. She began posting on obscure esoteric forums, pleading for assistance, and the day after Tommy's assault, she redoubled her attempts. It was one of these forums that led her to this location. To Dr. Caroline Vega. Dr. Kelly resided outside of Tavam Sound, a 2-hour journey from Brittany's home. Nevertheless, if Vega was half as capable as the stranger had said on the forums, it would be worthwhile. They had just directed her to a website that was ostensibly created by Dr. Kelly herself. According to this website, Dr. Kelly has the ability to remove curses, disperse ghosts, and create protective charms. It appeared to be fairly standard esoteric nonsense. The only thing on that website that appeared even somewhat plausible was a page stating that Dr. Kelly has produced several articles on botany and the medicinal benefits of various herbs that appeared credible. Brittany didn't have many alternatives, but if she had to accept a self-proclaimed practitioner of magic, she at least trusted the one with a PhD. Even if it was in botany. This is what brought her here. When Brittany arrived, a young woman answered the door and escorted her to the living room to wait. The aforementioned living room did appear to be lovely and comfy. The walls were adorned with a few detailed pictures of plants, and a large bookcase along the far side had a variety of herbal medicine and wild plant identification books, although there was one shelf that seemed dedicated to romance novels. She periodically heard additional voices and could hear people moving around the house. They were predominantly female. At one time, she observed 3 young women and 1 clean-shaven young male in their 20s leaving the living room to go outside. She had quietly followed them to the window to see their exit. Her eyes were riveted on the countenance of the tattooed man standing in the street, despite the fact that passing strangers temporarily obstructed her view of him as they walked toward the surrounding woods. Brittany watched them leave, interested as to what they were doing, before returning her focus to where the tattooed man had been standing. He was absent now. She knew she could still feel his gaze on her, however. "You have to be Brittany." The voice behind her caused her to turn around and see a tall woman in her 30s standing in the doorway behind her. Her red hair was styled in a bob cut. She had glasses with wire rims, and her outfit revealed a considerable amount of leg. Brittany knew her from her website image. "Yeah. You must be Dr. Vega, no? Please. My friends refer to me as Caroline," she said as she extended her hand to shake with Brittany. "Why don't you come to my office, and we'll see if I can't discover a remedy for your ailment?" Brittany smiled hesitantly, nodded, and then let Dr. Kelly to lead the way. "I hope my students were not a nuisance," she stated. "I attempt to keep my home accessible to them. I have other bedrooms available. You are aware that not everyone can afford to both pay college and rent a place to live. However, I like to assist when I can." "No. Absolutely not." Brittany responded. "You instruct?" "In town, at Upper Lake University. I am in charge of the plant biology program. Work is actually pretty fulfilling. I've been doing this for as long as I can remember, so it's rewarding to step back for a moment and attempt to teach the next generation." "How long have you been interested in plants?" As she entered Dr. Kelly's office, Brittany inquired, "May I help you?" She observed a mischievous grin on the woman's cherry-red lips. "I truly cannot tell you. I assume that for as long as I've been living. However, I'm guessing you're not here to discuss plants." She then indicated a seat on the opposite side of a wooden desk. She sat down in what appeared to be a robust office chair. No. Brittany responded as she sat down. Your website indicated that you are knowledgeable about entities or curses. Dear, I am likely one of the few individuals in the world you might consider an authority on this topic. Vega answered. I'm assuming you're seeing something, she said in a more somber manner, after her initially cheery tone had become a bit more grave. Brittany opened her mouth to speak prior to nodding. Have you examined it closely? Could you describe it? It's a guy. She whispered. He's tall. His hair is lengthy. Long, dark hair. These tattoos cover his entire chest. Like runes or veins. His hands also. They seem skeletal? Jennifer nodded. She observed Vega's forehead furrow. I see. Since when have you been seeing him? Nearly a month. Initially, I only encountered him at night and from a distance. And now? He is now everywhere. He has also been leaving bones and teeth. I've been discovering them in my home, and just last night. I believe he assaulted my boyfriend. He was also observing him. Is your guy still living? Her tone was so matter-of-fact that Brittany felt a pit in her stomach. She nodded. Is he hospitalized or at home? He is hospitalized. I saw him yesterday. Is he going to be all right? If he is still alive, then yes. I may very possibly be able to assist you both. However, it will be. Well? It will not be altogether simple. I am familiar with the described entity. The majority of my documents refer to him as Lemuel. He is elderly. Older than me, even. He is also hazardous. However, can we get rid of it? Brittany inquired with desperation in her voice. Yes, you can drive it away. I am aware of a means to injure such creatures. It will not be fatal. This type of thing tends to persist. However, they do not tolerate discomfort well. Find a means to damage them, and they will retreat and escape like if they were a wounded animal. However, you must act immediately. Lemuel does not have a time limit for playing with his prey. However, it appears that neither you nor your boyfriend have much time remaining. What am I need to do? Brittany inquired softly as she observed Dr. Kelly rise from her chair. She moved to a wall-mounted cabinet and unlocked it. She retrieved a mortar and pestle and a glass jar from within. Brittany could see small black figures intertwined in thick web sluggishly moving around in the jar, and her skin crawled when she realized it was full with spiders. According to the red spot on their bellies, they are black widows. Vega placed her belongings on the desk before resuming her seat. It will be necessary to puncture his heart. However, this is far easier said than done. Only a weapon enchanted with the suitable rune will be able to harm such a monster. And you'll require a specific poison to severely harm him. She removed one of the slow spiders from its web by opening the jar and dipping her fingers inside. Brittany shuddered as she observed the spider writhe and kick its legs. She observed it frantically burying its teeth into her fingertips. Dr. Kelly did not even flinch when she was bitten, as if she had not even noticed. She just dropped the spider into the mortar and selected 2 additional spiders from the jar to join it. Brittany could see unusual markings cut into the stone on the exterior of the mortar, as well as other symbols carved into the pestle. She watched as Vega grabbed it up and brought it down onto the confused spiders, smashing them into a splatter of quivering limbs and pulpy organs, before they could escape their prison. 3 poisonous spiders, 3 drops of your blood, and a rose petal. Vega whispered as she returned her gaze to Brittany. There is a rose bush in my backyard garden. Would you be nice enough to get it for me? Brittany nodded gently prior to standing. She was overjoyed to leave the office and Dr. Kelly behind. She was unaware of how tense she was until she stood up. As she exited the workplace, she observed the tattooed man. Lemuel observed her from the window. Behind his darkened lips, she observed filthy yellow teeth that appeared to be impossibly sharp. His gaze followed her through the living room, and she attempted not to look at him as she made her way through the house and out the back door. Caroline Vega's backyard was expansive and beautiful. Brittany might have bothered to enjoy it in happier times. The well-trimmed hedges and exotic, colorful flowers that grew in well-kept gardens. But her thoughts were elsewhere. It was easy for her to locate the rosebush. It stood out in one of the flower gardens in the backyard center. She carefully plucked a single rose from it before running back inside, terrified that the tattooed man might find her outside. She was nearly as frightened to return to Dr. Kelly as she had been when she first met him. At least she was able to precisely identify the tattooed man. With Dr. Kelly, she was less certain. She paused after observing her stick her hand into a jar of spiders as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She did not yet know if the stranger she had sought out was genuine or not. However, most con artists would not have crushed poisonous spiders into a paste. Whatever she was, Vega appeared sincerely interested in assisting her. She returned to the office to find Dr. Kelly patiently waiting for her behind the counter. Alongside the mortar, which was filled with the pulpy remnants of the 3 spiders, sat an iron dagger. The jar was gone, having been returned to the cabinet. "Many thanks, my dear," Vega whispered as she delicately removed the rose from Brittany's hand. As she extracted it, she allowed the stem to brush across her fingers. A thorn pricked her flesh and caused a superficial wound. Brittany attempted to retract her hand in pain, but Dr. Kelly grabbed her wrist. We'll definitely need that." Before gently moving Brittany's hand across the mortar, she stated, "Just unwind. It's only a small scrape." Before the first drop of blood landed into the concoction, crimson blood flowed from the fresh gash on the side of her index finger. The first one was followed by a second and a third before Dr. Kelly released her wrist. "There is great power in blood," she stated. "It's one of the most personal items you can utilize in a spell of this nature. You'll need that for such a toxin." She delicately removed one rose petal before placing it on her desk and pulverizing it into the spiders and blood combination. Then, when there was nothing left but a thick, dark maroon mixture, she took the pestle and, with almost reverent gestures, slid some of the mixture along the blade. "I should warn you immediately. If you so much as cut a mortal man with this, you will curse him with a slow and agonizing death. So use extreme caution when handling this blade." After coating the weapon with the liquid, she placed it on the table in front of Brittany and met her gaze. "But it will injure everything on earth, with the possible exception of the gods." Brittany slowly retrieved the blade. She examined it before returning her attention to Vega. "Do I simply have to cut him?" "Yes, a small cut will hurt him. It may be just enough. But I'd recommend you take no chances. Put it in his mind. This is the only way to be absolutely certain." She nodded and then exhaled. "I'm sure you've observed the surrounding woodlands. They are thick and solitary. A suitable location for a beast like Lemuel. Why don't you take a stroll? I'm guessing he won't let you go without a fight." Her comments gave Brittany another chill, and goosebumps appeared on her skin. She felt Dr. Kelly's touch on her shoulder as this occurred. It's acceptable to feel fear. However, remember that you are not defenseless. Not any longer. I doubt that he will recognize it. As ominous as her remarks had sounded previously, they now appear almost reassuring. Before nodding, Brittany took one more look at Dr. Kelly and then at the knife in her hand. "I'm not defenseless." She repeated her statement. Dr. Kelly accompanied her to the door, and as she stepped through it, Brittany could feel her heart hammering in panic. However, she headed towards the woodland while clutching the iron dagger fiercely. She detected motion behind the trees. She was aware that the tattooed man was observing her. Awaited her arrival. She would not keep him waiting for long. The forest engulfed her as she entered it. After around 10 minutes of walking, she turned around and could no longer see where she had begun. How many tales have ended when the hero is about to fight the monster? She contemplated to herself. How many of these warriors survived the ordeal? She attempted to control her breathing, but it felt impossible. She clung to the dagger despite knowing that her life depended on it. She was surrounded by a silent jungle. No birds, no animals. Only an awful, oppressive silence was present. She closed her eyes and sighed, attempting to control her panic. But there was truly no point. How many lives has this creature taken? How many idiots were foolish enough to charge into the woods for a suicide showdown? She whirled around after detecting motion behind her. As far as she could determine, nothing was present. She pondered Tommy and questioned whether he was okay. She considered the possibility that he was already deceased. So many what-if questions, so little time. More movement. The splinter of branches. She turned around to see his long, lanky form stalking through the trees with his animal-like gaze fixed on her. He paced like a hungry tiger in search of food. His hands, which were primarily of sinew and bone, flexed like claws. He measured her up in preparation for an attack. She raised the dagger and held it between them as if it could save her when he stopped. She observed him clenching his teeth. She could sense hunger in his eyes, but what she noticed most was simple sadistic delight. He opened his mouth, and the sound he produced was the demonic roar. It was very loud. A reverberating shriek that seemed to vibrate through her skull and reduce the brain tissue to pulp. She wanted to flee, but she was too terrified to move, and her only response to her terror was to scream. Her legs were shaking, as she realized that she was up against something that might not only pull her limbs from her bloody bodies, but something that would derive such enormous pleasure from killing her that it would relish her demise. It would cherish every ounce of misery it extracted from her writhing, scream-filled corpse, denying her the pleasure of death until the very end. The tattooed man riveted her with its gaze once more, beaming from ear to ear as it approached her. No. Brittany wept as it approached. She lurched backwards and lost her composure. No. She took only a few steps before falling. She fell steeply to the ground after being pushed down a modest incline by a boulder that was partially concealed in the earth. The knife slipped from her grasp as the tattooed man approached closer, collapsing to his hands and knees and crawling toward her like a twisted, vaguely humanoid monster. It glared at her from atop the slope she'd recklessly tumbled down before slithering towards her like a serpent. Its gaunt, lanky body crawled over hers. Its body spilled water upon hers. Its breath filled her nostrils with the stench of rotting meat. It observed her and savored her terrified cries, knowing it had her. It moved closer and slid a black tongue up the bare flesh of her neck, leaving behind a path of writhing maggots. She could feel it determining where it would start tearing her apart. Against her fingertips. She could feel the blade resting on the ground, just beyond her reach. Brittany closed her eyes as she clutched it, knowing she would be killed before she could save herself, but resolute to make her final act one of defiance. She brought the knife to the tattooed man's chest and drove it directly into his ribcage. The thing shrieked, producing a sound like to shattered glass and nails on a blackboard. It retreated, grabbing at the dagger in its chest as its eyes widened with agony and rage. Brittany reopened her eyes and saw as the creature scrambled away from her, writhing like the spiders Dr. Kelly had crushed to create the venom that was now coursing through its veins. The chest wound seemed dark and necrotic. Despite the creature's inability to withdraw the blade, the dagger appeared to break in half. The handle dropped to the woodland floor rusted and rotting, as if the poison had consumed the metal. The blade remained buried in its chest, hardly discernible among the massive amounts of dark blood that oozed from the wound. Brittany anticipated to see a renewed wrath in the tattooed man's eyes when he locked her with a glare. She instead observed perplexity. She witnessed fear. This predator had no tolerance for suffering. It was unaccustomed to being injured. It appeared to retreat, prompting Brittany to do the same. She pulled herself backward before regaining her footing and beginning to run. The screams of the tattooed man pursued her, but when she turned around she saw the creature still on the ground, desperately attempting to remove the shattered sword from its chest as it crept farther into the forest. Despite this, Brittany continued to run. She wouldn't stop till she saw the Tavam Sound suburbs again. And when she finally returned to the brilliant sunlight, she went on her knees, wrapped her arms about herself, and wept. The tattooed man's shouts faded into the distance. Those screams were ones she would forever hear in her nightmares. As the beast that had been pursuing her vanished into the darkness of the forest, she allowed herself a glimmer of hope that it would not return. It took her nearly a month to return to Tavam Sound. A month had passed without her discovering any teeth in her bed or seeing any forms standing outside her window. She asked Tommy periodically if he had witnessed anything, but he always assured her that he hadn't. The look of calm relief in his eyes as he stated this convinced her to believe him. When they last spoke, Dr. Kelly advised her that she was not interested in payment. These kind of objects have no monetary value. She has stated, those that seek me out are typically in need. I am currently well off enough to avoid preying on the destitute. There is no fee. Simply stay safe. Disseminate the word. Brittany had vowed that she would do so. But it wasn't nearly enough for her. She had been unable to forget Dr. Kelly since the day they first met. This woman understood things that the majority of people would never grasp. She chose to use her expertise to aid others in need. It appeared quite noble. Significantly more noble than a music career, which hardly seemed that exciting after surviving being hunted by some sort of monster. So, Brittany informed Tommy that she would be gone for a couple of days and return to Tavam Sound. Dr. Kelly was, after all, a teacher. Perhaps she could accommodate another pupil.